President as a party leader. Okay. The president is ultimately dependent on their party in order to move their legislative agenda. Okay. And as a party leader, that's what the president is responsible for doing to carry out their party's platform and maintain their party's coalition. Representatives and senators of the president's party usually form a coalition of support in Congress to push the president's proposals, and they can be relied on more so than members of the opposition party. Party leadership in Congress is very important for the president, especially when the president is trying to counter the conflict between the executive and legislative branches. And when the president is trying to get something done, basically he needs party leadership to support him, and he needs party majorities in Congress to support him to get his agenda passed. He is the ultimate whip. As a whip, he is going to use a carrot and stick approach. Okay, um, he gets his party in Congress to vote along party lines. Now, he's not always successful at doing this. There is some slippage of support for the president's agenda in Congress, especially when the president is not popular or if the president is supporting a controversial issue that his party members in Congress's constituents do not agree with. So, for example, if a Democratic president is supporting cuts in military spending, Democrats in Congress representing the state of Virginia are not going to support the president in that policy agenda because it hurts their constituents, and those congresspersons are worried about getting reelected. But nonetheless, the president tries to be the ultimate whip. Now, the way that he uses the carrot and stick approach generally centers around raising money, campaigning, and other favors. Okay, campaigning for party candidates means that he's going to help raise money. He's going to make speeches for members of his party. He is going to help. He's going to help gain support, and that's going to work if he is popular. Now, one way that the White House can provide, or the one way the White House can also convince party members to do what they want is to provide a couple of favors, like having photographs taken with the president, or allowing rides on Air Force One with the president, or giving Congress members invitation to White House events. And then the president can also withhold favors. Generally, that's not too popular. Now, what does the president want Congress to look like? Of course, the president wants Congress to have a majority of the majority to be the same political party as the president, excuse me. But that's hard to do. Of course, you know the coattail effect. We've talked about that when we talked about elections. Now, president's coattails, this occurs when voters cast their ballot for congressional candidates of the president's party because they support the president. So it's like straight ticket voting for the president's party. Now, this cartoon shows that President Obama in 2012's coattails were actually hurting the Democratic candidates lower in the ballot because he wasn't as popular as he was in 2008. So they were afraid that they would actually lose seats in Congress. And that's generally the trend. Even though the president wants a majority party support in Congress, the president's party typically gains few, if any, seats in Congress in midterm elections. Okay. The president also is chief of state. Now, being chief of state means that he is the number one face of the nation. So when people think of the United States, they're going to think of the President of the United States. Now, being chief of state, he has a couple of jobs to do. Okay, so he's the most important representative of our country, meaning he's going to travel the United States, throughout the United States and the world, representing our public policy and our political agenda. He ultimately wants to get good publicity for the United States, and a lot of times that's going to look like just meeting with foreign leaders. He is a morale builder. Being a morale builder, he wants to build trust in the government's performance. He wants to make United States citizens proud of their government. The way that he can do that is he can create unity. He can project a sense of national unity and serve as the country's ceremonial leader. So that can be anything from, um, talking to factory workers in Ohio and talking about how our economy is growing, or it can mean going to Egypt and giving a speech about how we aren't the enemy of Islam, which, by the way, is how Obama won his Nobel Peace Prize. Foreign, again, visiting longtime allies. Like, why was Canada the first foreign trip Obama took? He wanted to make sure that the Canadian Prime Minister knew that we were friends still with them and that our bond with Canada is sacred. A foreign morale builder or domestic morale builder, he can go visit flood or natural disaster victims. He can, give a speech on Sandy Hook and tell us that we will not have to deal with this again. Okay, so those kind of things. Okay. With as an economic morale builder, he will ensure us that the economic state of the country is improving. Okay. I'm going to skip ahead a few slides. That. Okay. And kind of this connects to morale builder, and this also connects to being chief of state is working as a crisis manager. A crisis manager is really a major intention of the framers. So being a crisis manager means during international and domestic disturbances, the president is to take charge, calm the masses, and be the quick, decisive reaction that the American public needs in order to protect the public good. So in international and domestic disturbances, the president takes charge. That was an intention of the framers. That was one of the reasons we have the executive branch, is because of Shays' Rebellion. It is necessary for the president to command the military, to squash disorder, and to make sure that that person has the public good in mind. Now, that also means that he's going to manage international crisis, to domestic crisis, to economic crises. Okay, so international crisis, when there's a need to protect from any potential conflict spillovers from neighbors, the presidents can go maintain order abroad. Like the President Obama has made it a priority to help Mexico fight drug cartels. Okay, so that's a crisis in Mexico, but it has a spillover effect in the United States. So the president has worked with the Department of Justice and Homeland Security to help check drug cartels in Mexico. Domestic crisis, that can mean calling in the National Guard, declaring states of emergency, which you must call in order to have FEMA or the Federal Emergency Management Agency intervene with disaster relief. Okay, so a lot of people, talk poorly about how President Bush handled Hurricane Katrina, that he took too long to get relief down to New Orleans. Okay, but that was 3 years after people praised him for how he handled 9/11, the crisis of 9/11. So it depends on the public perception of how you handle that crisis, whether or not you look like a good crisis manager. Domestic crisis, I already talked about. Economic crises, during times of economic downturn or recession, the president, being one person, can make quick decisions about whether or not we can provide stimulus or relief for economic crisis. Like FDR had immediate relief through the New Deal legislation and executive orders to pump money into the economy to help relieve the effects of the Great Depression. Foreign policy. Okay, he has formal Constitutional foreign policy powers. Constitutionally, the president is commander-in-chief. He is chief diplomat, and again, he is head of executive agencies and departments that take care of business. Okay, so we're going to start with chief diplomat. He has the power to decide how we are going to interact with other countries. That can be anything from a formal recognition of a new nation's government to negotiating treaties with the consent of 2/3 of the Senate. Now, some presidents are better chief diplomats than others. If you look at Wilson, Wilson was a great chief diplomat. He had the 14 points, which included the League of Nations. He had the plan to end, all world wars. He was well versed in diplomacy, but he was a poor negotiator with Congress, because even though he negotiated the Treaty of Versailles to end World War I, he couldn't convince Congress to pass that treaty. Okay, but that is chief diplomat. You negotiate treaties, you recognize foreign countries. Also, part of chief diplomat is coming up with doctrines. Like, what is the foreign policy theory for the United States moving forward? Like the Monroe Doctrine, the Truman Doctrine, the Eisenhower Doctrine. Commander-in-chief, of course, he's head of the military. So he can decide to send troops to specific areas of conflict. He authorizes military action, and that part of that is the decision to use weapons of mass destruction. Okay, informal powers. As national security concerns grow, Congress and the people look to the president for leadership and will be more likely to allow him more power over foreign policy because he can make definitive, concise actions. So as we are more concerned about our security, the power of the presidency grows because Congress knows that they won't be able to make quick decisions. Now, so these informal things that the president now can do when it comes to foreign policy. He can enter into an executive agreement, which is an informal treaty that does not require Senate approval. Now, if there's something in that agreement that requires money in order to enforce or implement it, then Congress does have the check by having to appropriate that money to that program. So if the president has an executive agreement with Mexico to fight the war against the drug cartels, but if Congress doesn't like that policy, Congress can just not provide money for guns or money for border security agents. Congressional executive agreements. Congress actually handed the president power to negotiate trade agreements and tariff rates with other countries. So even though Congress has the power to regulate commerce, they gave that power to the president. Now they still have to approve those treaties with a majority vote from both houses of Congress, but they gave the president the power to negotiate commerce. Okay. The president also is allowed to create departments and agencies and nominate the secretaries and directors of those agencies. Technically, the cabinet is not in the Constitution, and none of these government agencies are expressly written in the Constitution, so this is an informal power. This is a way that he has expanded his power. You look at if you look at how we handled post 9/11, and we passed the Patriot Act. The Patriot Act gave the president the power to monitor phone records and conversations and emails, gave the president the power to organize the Department of Homeland Security, and gave the president the power to appoint heads to certain agencies. So again, that power was acquired as concern for national security grew. All right, I'm going to stop here, and I'm going to pick up right here to finish foreign policy powers in the next slide.